At the Battle of the Somme in 1916, a British officer named Lieutenant Blowers crawled through German trenches armed with nothing but a 6-shot Webley revolver. By the time he reached British lines, he had fired 103 rounds through that weapon, reloading at least 17 times under fire while moving through enemy positions. He earned the Military Cross. His revolver sits today in a glass case at the Bovington Tank Museum in southern England. The Webley Revolver was built across decades by a family of Birmingham gunsmiths who outlasted every serious competitor in the British handgun market. Philip and James Webley were both established firearms manufacturers by 1835. After James died in 1856 and Samuel Colt's London factory closed the following year, the family had a near-clear field. Philip's son, Thomas William, obtained factory machinery in 1887 that allowed mass production for the first time, ending the handcrafted era and giving the British government a supplier capable of arming an empire at scale. That same year, the British Army was looking to replace the Enfield Mark I and Mark II revolvers, which had been in service since 1880 and were already considered inadequate. Webley submitted the Mark I, a top-break revolver with automatic extraction. Breaking the frame open ejects all 6 spent cartridges at once, clearing the cylinder in a single motion. The government ordered 10,000 at 3 pounds apiece, and the relationship between Webley and the British military that followed would last 76 years. The cartridge that defined the Webley was the .455, an 11.5 millimeter round firing a 265-grain lead bullet at roughly 650 feet per second. By modern standards, that velocity is low. The American .45 ACP fires a lighter bullet above 800 feet per second, and the .45 Colt pushed a similar weight past 1,000. American gun writers have spent decades calling the .455 slow and underpowered, but the criticism misses the point of the design entirely. The British had a different philosophy of terminal ballistics. A slow, heavy bullet does not pass through the target. It stays inside and transfers its energy into flesh and bone. Modern ballistic gel testing confirms this. The standard .455 round tumbles on impact, creating a wound cavity larger than several modern calibers despite moving at nearly half their speed. It penetrates approximately 19 inches of gel, well beyond the 12 to 14-inch range considered optimal for defensive ammunition. In 1898, Webley introduced the .455 Mark III cartridge, better known as the Man-Stopper, a 218-grain soft lead bullet with a hollowed cavity in the nose designed to deform on impact. During the 1904 Thompson-Lagarde stopping power tests in the United States, the Man-Stopper was rated
superior to the .45 Colt, with testers noting that its shock effects on bone exceeded anything else they had experimented with. The round lasted exactly 1 year in military service before the Hague Convention of 1899 banned it. After the ban, British forces reverted to full metal jacket rounds and deliberately reduced velocity further, engineering the bullet to stay inside the target rather than punch through, maximizing lethality within the legal constraints. The Webley's first serious combat test came in South Africa. The Mark IV was introduced in 1899, coinciding with the start of the Second Boer War, and quickly became known as the Boer War model. Officers and NCOs bought them on their way to the front. 36,756 Mark IVs entered British Army service. The design performed well in the dust and heat of the South African veldt and was not significantly modified for the next 14 years. When the First World
War began in August 1914, the standard sidearm was the Mark V, adopted just 9 months earlier. The initial order for 20,000 had not been completed, so there were more old Mark IVs in service than the new model when fighting started. On the 24th of May 1915, the Mark VI was adopted as the standard sidearm for British and Commonwealth troops, and remained so for the rest of the war. It featured a squared-off grip, replacing the old bird's beak design, a 6-inch barrel that was 2 inches longer than its predecessors, and a dull, non-reflective finish suited to trench conditions. Close to 300,000 were produced during the war. The Mark VI was issued to officers, airmen, naval crews, boarding parties, trench raiders, machine gun teams, and tank crews. In the close quarters fighting of the trenches, the heavy .455 round proved well suited to engagements measured in feet rather than yards. The top break action allowed reloading with
one hand in confined spaces, and at 2.4 pounds, the revolver doubled as a blunt instrument when ammunition ran out. Trench warfare grew so desperate that Lieutenant Arthur Pritchard of the 3rd Royal Berkshire Regiment commissioned a spike bayonet for the Mark VI from the gunmaker W. Greener, fashioned from converted French Gras bayonets, and sold privately to officers on the Western Front. Among those who carried a Webley through the trenches was a 24-year-old Oxford graduate named John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. Commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant in the Lancashire Fusiliers in 1915, Tolkien arrived in France in June 1916, weeks before the Battle of the Somme, and served as battalion signals officer at Beaumont-Hamel, Serre, and the Leipzig salient. The Somme produced over 1 million casualties. Tolkien contracted trench fever in October and was invalided home, where he later wrote that, by 1918, all but one of his close friends
were dead. During his recovery, he began writing the stories that became the Silmarillion, the mythology underlying The Lord of the Rings. The blasted landscapes of Mordor and the dead marshes, where faces of fallen warriors stare through stagnant pools, were not purely imagined. Tolkien's Webley is on display at the Imperial War Museum North in Manchester, donated by his family in 1996 during the firearms amnesty following the Dunblane massacre. After the First World War, the British military decided the .455 was too large for the average conscript soldier and began looking for a .38 caliber replacement with a 200-grain bullet. Webley had been arming the military since 1887 and already produced a .38 caliber revolver line for the civilian and police market, so they submitted their Mark IV in .38/200 caliber for evaluation in 1928. The government took the Webley prototype to the Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield Lock. Enfield produced a revolver that was nearly identical on the outside, but had enough internal differences to prevent parts interchangeability. It was adopted in 1932 as the Enfield No. 2 Mark I, and Webley was told their services were not required. Webley sued the government for £2,250 in research and design costs. Enfield's position was that Captain Boyes, the assistant superintendent of design, had created the revolver independently with only assistance from Webley. The claim was denied. A separate body, the Royal Commission on Awards to Inventors, then awarded Webley £1,250 in compensation. The government would not admit it had appropriated the design, but another branch of the same government paid for it anyway. During the Second World War, the Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield could not produce enough No. 2 revolvers to meet demand. The government that had taken Webley's design denied their contribution and awarded the contract to a government factory, went back to Webley and asked them to produce their .38 Mark IV as a substitute standard. Webley produced approximately 500,000 of these revolvers, stamping them war finish on the frame.
a deliberate signal that the rough appearance reflected wartime production speed and not a decline in Webley's standards as gunmakers. The point, .455 Mark VI, officially declared obsolete in 1932, continued appearing in officers' holsters throughout the war regardless. Many simply preferred the larger weapon. It was not fully retired until 1947. The Webley Point .38 Mark IV was not completely replaced by the Browning High Power until 1963. An armorer stationed in West Germany noted that by the time the Webley was officially retired, the ammunition allowance had dropped to 2 cartridges per man per year. The revolvers were not wearing out because they were barely being fired. 76.
Years of continuous service, from 1887 to 1963. The Boer War, the First World War, the Second World War, Korea, the Suez Crisis, the Malayan Emergency, the Rhodesian Bush War. One design, refined across 6 military marks, carried by British and Commonwealth servicemen on every continent. A pistol that fired a round banned by international law for being too effective. A pistol whose replacement design the government copied and then could not produce in sufficient quantity. A pistol that Tolkien carried through the Somme, and that Lieutenant Blowers reloaded 17 times in a single engagement while surrounded by the dead. For 76 years, the Webley was the sidearm of the British Empire. If you want to see what happened when the SAS got their hands on a machine gun the RAF threw away, that video is up there now. Subscribe if you are new. We cover the stories from British military history that did not make it into the textbooks.